Hi, readers, it's Lori. I'm so glad you're here today to talk about books that you've read with me as I talk about books that I've read. So maybe you've read some of these. I'd love to hear what you read in the month of April for your wrap up. But I chose a couple intentionally that I had planned to read, and then I chose a couple that were impulse choices. And I'm happy with all of my choices for the most part. So, if you watched my 5-star prediction wrap up, that I did not finish Age of Vice. I started this, I think, toward the end of March, but significantly started it in the month of April and just could not get past 150 pages or so, 155. I talked about this in the other video. It's a story about a family that is in the depths of underworld activities, murder, just kind of like a mafia kind of situation in India. And I just couldn't get into the characters. I just couldn't get into the story. It just wasn't moving quite fast enough. I may try it again in the future. I don't know. But for me, in April of this year, this was not the read that I could complete. So then also in the 5-star wrap up, I talked about The Soulmate by Sally Hepworth, which was my replacement for Age of Vice. And this was a 4-star read for me. I did enjoy it. It's my first novel by this author as well. I think I will want to read more by her. It was a thriller, suspense kind of story. I want to talk about something different than I did really in the first book, or the first video about this, but I don't want to spoil anything because there's not a lot spoken about the plot of this in the beginning, and for good reason. But I did mention in the other video that this family lives on a cliff, and the cliff is known for people who want to take their lives. And her husband is kind of a whisperer when it comes to encouraging and convincing people to stay alive. So he goes to the cliff a lot and he talks people off of the ledge, so to speak. And then one night a woman comes to the cliff and she does indeed jump, and he makes a weird gesture. So essentially, Pippa and Gabe, then their stories are revealed around this particular person. There is a connection. I won't say with whom. What I also liked about this book, which I didn't tell you, is that some of the chapters are written from the voice of the woman who jumps off the cliff, which I really thought was nice. To me, it added to the backstory, because otherwise, how would there be a backstory about this woman's life, right? And why it was significant, and did he know her, and did they have a connection, and if so, what? So that is really kind of how this unfolds. And I thought it was really well done. And like I said, I listened to a podcast where Sally Hepworth talked about this. She was hilarious. It was the Book of the Month podcast. I did not listen to the podcast until I was in the middle of Age of Vice and just really struggling with it. And then it was like, oh, I could read that instead. But she talks about her life in Australia. She talks about her writing life. She talks about a hilarious story where she was coming in for that interview and had to sleep with 2 strangers in a hotel room, which it's really kind of funny. And she talks about the inspiration for this book, and that there really is a cliff in Australia that is known for people coming to take their lives. So I enjoyed the backstory of the characters. I enjoyed the story that Sally Hepworth told about how she was inspired to write this. And I enjoyed a lot of just getting to know her and some of the experiences she's had as an author. So I recommend this, and I recommend listening to that podcast. You're not getting the prettiest part of my mug. Look, here it is. Yeah, it kind of matches I didn't do it on purpose, but kind of matches my shirt today. It's a flowery spring day. I have windows open, but I don't know for how long because it's going to be warm today. Okay. I also read A House with Good Bones by T. Kingfisher. I buddy read this with my friend Tammy. We had planned on doing this in March when it was coming out, and I was showcasing it as an anticipated read for me. I had very, very high hopes for this. It is super weird. I'm just going to say it. It is super, super weird. It's very short, which I didn't anticipate. So it was a very fast read. I actually could have read it faster, but I was trying to keep on pace, kind of where Tammy was. And also just starting to feel like, was I going to like this? Let me get my glasses on because honestly, I forgot this girl's name. So it's Sam Montgomery goes to her mother's house because according to the jacket, her brother tells her that her mom's off. That didn't actually happen in the book. You didn't hear anything from or about the brother until quite some time later, but that's okay. I guess it makes for a more compelling blurb in the jacket, but okay. She goes to visit her mom, and her mom has definitely changed. She's completely renovated the inside of the house. It used to be really colorful and bright and quirky and full of clutter, and now it's clean and sterile and white and very different. And her mom is acting very odd, and she's really curious about what's happening. There is a quirky kind of psychic neighbor down the street. There is another character who is he does their lawns and does some maintenance on their house. The brother never really shows up at all, which is kind of surprising based on what I was anticipating when I read the blurb. And she and her mother have this odd kind of conversation back and forth about some of the things that are happening in the house, which are quite creepy and odd. I will give you that. There is a lot of creepiness to this. I wouldn't say anything that kept me up at night for sure. Very rarely anything does, but nothing that, I mean, there's one particular creepiness that does stand out to me, but it was just weird. And her dialogue was weird. The character's dialogue was weird. It's written in the first person, but then there are also these parenthetical sentences that don't need to be parenthetical. I don't even know how to describe it. Like she makes jokes in the parenthetical pieces, but it's odd. She goes back and forth sort of remembering her childhood. Of course, that is significant. And then what's currently happening in this house. There is a significant amount of backstory about her grandmother and how weird she was and how rigid she was, and that it is her house. So that is a central part of the plot. There were a lot of things, even though this is so short, there were a lot of things that were really unnecessary. Like the lawn man was kind of unnecessary. The party they went to was kind of unnecessary, but I don't know. It was just okay. I don't even know if I rated it. Let me see if I even rated it. It was just okay. I did. I gave it 3 stars. It was not what I was expecting after having read What Moves the Dead. Yeah, this just did not really excite me like I thought it would. And I'm kind of sad about that. And I'm probably going to unhaul it, but I don't know, I may keep it for a little bit, see what other people in my family think. And then if nobody wants it in their home, I will probably unhaul it. I don't have this because Lisa actually took it to work with her today to read it, but I read The Golden Spoon by Jessa Maxwell. Yes, Jessa Maxwell. The Golden Spoon is a cute little mystery about a baking show. There's a woman named Betsy who's been host for a long, long time, and she's been very successful at it. And she actually hosts it in her home, in her kind of mansion, if you will. The mansion is called Grafton Manor. And so she's on one side of the mansion, and the baking contestants are on the other side of the mansion. What upsets her to begin with is, and this is where it got a little weird. There's a beginning foreshadowing, and then there's the backstory of what led up to that event. It just doesn't ever really kind of fully pull that into a complete circle. I think Jessa Maxwell, I think this was her debut novel, so we'll give her that. And so all of these characters show up one by one for this baking competition, and you meet them one by one. They introduce themselves sort of in their chapters, and then they, of course, talk about their experiences along the way. But the host is upset because they add a different co-host to the mix. And he is kind of central to a lot of what happens in this book. So he's not peripheral like the brother in the other book I just described. It unfolds in the typical way that baking competitions do. But of course it is a murder mystery. So there is a murder. It's not a cozy. It's a little more elevated than a cozy mystery, but it had some depth to it, and it had the opportunity maybe for some additional depth, but I'm glad I read it. I probably would buy it to keep it on my shelf. I'm not sure. I'm not certain about that, but I did get it from the library, and I'm glad. It was let's see, what did I give it? I gave it 3 stars. So I guess maybe that's a little low as I think back on it, but yeah, it was solidly written, better than the Tea Kingfisher for sure. And I love baking shows, so I think I was just super hyped about this one. And it took forever for my library to get it, honest to goodness. So speaking of my library, while I was there picking up the Golden Spoon, I picked up Horror I don't even know how to say that, and I'm Scandinavian, by Grady Hendrix. So I have a bookmark in it because Lisa started this too, but then she picked up the Golden Spoon instead. I love this cover. So obviously this is modeled after, if you've never been to IKEA, you might not know that, modeled after an IKEA catalog. Let me show you this without spoiling anything tremendous. Even each chapter has a heading about a particular piece of furniture. So it's so fun. I'm not going to hold this up because when I do, it yellows everything in my lighting. So I was simultaneously listening to another Grady Hendrix at the same time I was listening to reading the Tea Kingfisher, and they were bleeding together, and I had to stop. So I picked up Horror Store because I thought that it possibly was different, and it was not a haunted house, it was a haunted store. So there's a distinction there, but I also had finished the Tea Kingfisher by then. This is crazy weird. Okay. It is creepy. It is not like, I wouldn't say the creep factor is a 5, but it's creepy. So it follows a couple of employees at the store manager, another employee who is truly challenged. Her name is Amy. And then there's Ruth Ann, who's an older employee who's been there for a really long time, is solid, capable, like no nonsense woman. And they're going to spend the night in the store and see who's trashing the store at night and who's doing some things that they shouldn't be doing in the evening. 2 other employees show up too. So it ends up being this like weird band of people, but they show up because they think the store is haunted, and they're going to film this experience for their new show that they're going to produce on haunted places together. This is my description for this book. It is weird. It is at times hilarious, which is obviously, now I know, which is Grady Hendrix's strength, I guess. It is so I read it really quickly, so there's that. It's a really fast read. It is likable, and it's so weird. I just can't even. So what are trigger warnings? I guess it would be reanimated creatures, and there's some pretty significant gore and kind of destruction, which actually bothers me too. Like, I don't love movies or books where there are a lot of things that are just being destroyed. Like, it really bothers me. But other than that, it's funny. I wouldn't say it's totally like you can't sleep at night, but it was fun. And I'm glad I read it before I finished How to Sell a Haunted House. Let's just say that. So let's talk about How to Sell a Haunted House, which I listened to, which is also by Grady Hendrix. And I had purchased it on Libro.fm. So I have it forever. I may re-listen to this. Megan listened to it first and then was telling me that there was a part in this book that made her scream out loud in her car. And I kept thinking, what could it be? What could happen? Like, I don't know. So this one is about these two family members whose parents are suddenly killed in a car accident. Their father apparently has some sort of a stroke or heart attack or something, and the mother goes to drive him to the hospital, and they are in an accident and they both die. So their children, Louise and Mark, are left to clean out their house and sell it. And the reason they're selling it is because the distribution of assets was a surprise to them. And I don't want to give too much away, but they spend most of this book fighting. That part I could have done without, but it kind of is somewhat central to the plot. No, it's not even somewhat. It's central to the plot. Okay, so I was okay with it once I discovered that it was central to the plot. It's incredibly juvenile fighting, but it's meant to be funny. And at times it was funny, and at times it wasn't. There are parts of this book that were funny, but not as funny as Horror Store. So they are going to try to fix up this house to sell it and get rid of all their stuff. Well, her mom made a bunch of puppets. Trigger warning for animated dolls or puppets, which apparently is pretty significant in the population of people, because when I posted something about it on Facebook and Instagram, all kinds of people were responding how they are really creeped out by puppets and dolls. So Lisa is too. I don't think this is one she's going to read. She might read Horror Store, but she will probably not read this. I'm just listening, and it gets better and better and better in terms of plot. So the beginning of it was a little slow for me because they're just fighting over this house and they're throwing things away, and they're, but then they're noticing that some of those things that they've thrown away are not staying thrown away. And then they notice some other things that are happening. And then there's this backstory that you understand about their childhood and why they are kind of the way they are and what happened that really impacted their relationship. And then some of what happened to Mark while they were estranged. And that is a backstory that's significant to the plot. Then I got to the part where Megan screamed in her car, and I was also ironically driving at the time. I did not scream, but I did find it to be incredibly disgusting and freaky, hard to listen to. That's all I'll say, but if you know, you know. And then there are some other parts later that are just like so grisly and I gave it 4 stars because I thought that was some unique imagining for sure. And it did have a plot that really, to me, stayed sort of flowing and stayed in the kind of, then you were like, oh, now that makes sense. Oh, that makes sense. Yeah, it was. And it was funny. It just got funnier and funnier and funnier the more it went. So I do recommend that one. I enjoyed it. I had a fun time reading it, listening to it. And then the last one I just finished yesterday at the time I'm filming this. So right at the end of the month of April, I read and finished The Kind Worth Killing by Peter Swanson. The story goes that Ted and Lily meet each other on a flight from London back to the US. They're both sitting in first class. Ted is drinking a good bit and Lily is starting to drink, and they end up changing seats with another passenger so that they can sit together. And there's a bit of a chemistry between them, but not anything inappropriate and improper. And Ted shares with her that he thinks he's pretty sure that his wife is cheating on him with the contractor that's building their new home. They haven't been married terribly long. He says, he could just kill her for cheating on him. And Lily says, well, I mean, you could, and I could help you. And at first, of course, it's kind of a joke. And then maybe it's not. the story unfolds with a bit of backstory on Lily, a bit of backstory on Ted and his marriage and how this came to be, a bit of backstory, but not as much on the other people that are kind of important, the wife of Ted and another kind of central character. But it unfolds in a way that is pretty compelling. Like I read this, listened and read this pretty quick. It was like I could not put it down. In fact, I was babysitting for my grandkids and I was like taking every moment I had where they were somewhat quiet to read this book. I loved this one. I have not loved another Peter Swanson quite as much as I loved this one. It took some really cool twists and turns. It was compelling. It had a solidly written plot. I've had a lot of people on YouTube, Chapter and Converse is one of them, who love this and have been anxiously awaiting the sequel. I can see why. I really can. I think this is definitely so far my favorite Peter Swanson, and I've enjoyed all of them. So 5 stars for me on this one. And that was nice. It was really a nice way to round out the month. Okay, so that's my wrap up. A couple of 3s, a 4 on the Soulmate, and a 5. So I can't wait to hear if you've read any of these, if you're a fan of any of these authors or these books, and what you read in the month of April. I am at 23 out of 52 books, which is my goal for this year. There we go. That's a wrap. Thanks for joining me. Thanks for sharing your comments. Thanks for subscribing. I have some new subscribers, so welcome. Thank you. I'm happy you're here. I can't wait to hear from you and hear what you love to read and what content that you would like to see, because I'm always open to new ideas about content. And as always, happy reading. Bye.